There's nothing worse than being judged for something you didn't do, especially when your whole life has been about doing what's right. Imagine standing in chains while people who don't know you decide your fate. In the frontier town of Redemption Creek, a weathered mountain man faces the hangman's noose for a murder he didn't commit. The judge laughs, certain this will be an easy verdict. But when the accused rolls up his sleeve, a silver star appears, the mark of an outlaw hunter. For 30 years, this man tracked the West's most dangerous criminals. Now he's the one in chains. How did a legendary lawman end up accused of murder? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 days before he stood accused in that courtroom, Samuel Bridger rode into Redemption Creek with nothing but a worn saddlebag and 30 years of memories he'd just as soon forget. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street, and Sam took his time, letting his horse set the pace. At 58, he'd learned that hurrying never got you anywhere worth going. The town sprawled in a narrow valley between steep Montana mountains, the kind of place that looked like it had been dropped there by accident and never quite figured out how to leave. False-fronted buildings lined both sides of the street, a general store, a saloon, a barber shop with a faded pole, and an assay office with bars on the windows. Everything looked tired, as if the whole town was holding its breath, waiting for something to either save it or finish it off. Sam had seen 100 towns like this one, mining communities that boomed fast and died faster, leaving behind weathered buildings and broken dreams. But something about Redemption Creek called to him. Maybe it was the quiet, maybe it was just time to stop moving. He guided his horse toward a 2-story building with a hand-painted sign that read, "Henley's Boarding House, Clean Rooms, Fair Prices." A woman stood on the porch, sweeping dust that would be back before sunrise. She looked up as Sam approached, and her face showed the kind of cautious welcome that frontier folks had learned to wear. Friendly enough, but holding judgment until a stranger proved himself. "Good evening, ma'am," Sam said, touching the brim of his hat. "I'm looking for a room, if you have one available." The woman set her broom aside and wiped her hands on her apron. She was somewhere in her mid-50s, with silver threading through dark hair, pulled back in a practical bun. Laugh lines framed her eyes, but there was steel underneath the kindness. "Martha Henley," she said. "I've got rooms. You planning on staying long?" "That depends," Sam said, dismounting with the stiffness of a man who'd spent too many years in the saddle. "Town hiring?" "Depends what kind of work you're looking for." Martha studied him with the practiced eye of someone who'd sized up countless drifters. "Mining's mostly played out. Few claims still producing, but not enough to make a man rich." "I'm not looking to get rich, ma'am. Just looking for a place to rest a while." Something in his tone must have satisfied her, because Martha's expression softened. "Well, you've come to the right place for resting. Not much excitement in Redemption Creek these days. $1 a week includes breakfast. Supper's extra if you want it. That sounds more than fair." Sam paid for 2 weeks in advance, which earned him an approving nod from Martha. She showed him to a small room on the 2nd floor, clean, sparse, with a narrow bed and a washstand. A window overlooked the main street, and Sam stood there for a moment, watching the town settle into evening. A few men walked toward the saloon. A shopkeeper closed his shutters. Everything moved with the slow rhythm of a place where tomorrow would look much like today. That suited Sam just fine. After tending to his horse at the livery stable, Sam returned to the boarding house and accepted Martha's offer of supper. He sat alone at a corner table in her small dining room, eating beef stew that was better than he'd had in months. Martha moved between the kitchen and the few other boarders, her presence somehow making the space feel less lonely. "You're not much of a talker, are you?" Martha said when she refilled his coffee. "Got out of the habit, I suppose. Spent a lot of years with just my horse for company. What kind of work did that involve?" Sam hesitated. This was always the difficult moment, how much truth to share. "I tracked people," he said finally. "Folks who didn't want to be found." Martha's eyes sharpened with understanding. "Bounty hunter?" Something like that. But I'm done with all that now. Looking for something quieter. Well, you picked the right town. Redemption Creek's so quiet sometimes. I think we've all died, and nobody bothered to mention it. She said it with humor, but Sam heard the undercurrent of concern. Used to be livelier, back when the mines were really producing. My husband was marshal then. Kept things fair and square. Was? Died 5 years ago. Heart just gave out one morning. Martha's voice remained steady, but her hand tightened on the coffee pot. Town's been different since. We've got a sheriff now, but he's more interested in keeping certain folks happy than keeping things fair. Sam filed that information away. Every town had its politics, its power structures. He'd hoped to avoid all that, but old habits of observation died hard. After supper, Sam sat on the boarding house porch as darkness settled over the valley. He pulled out a worn leather journal from his coat pocket, the same journal he'd carried for 3 decades. Its pages held sketches, notes, and names. So many names. Some of the wanted men he'd tracked had been truly evil. Others had just been desperate or stupid or unlucky. He'd brought them all in, believing in something his father had taught him. Justice matters, even when it's inconvenient. But justice had cost him. A wife who couldn't bear the worry of his dangerous work. Friends who died helping him. Years of his life spent in the company of violence and hard men. At some point, Sam had looked up and realized he'd become as weathered and worn as this journal. And he'd started wondering if there might be something else. Some different way to spend whatever years he had left. Redemption Creek, he thought, might be that place. As he sat there, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, a group of riders passed through town. 4 men on good horses, riding with the kind of confidence that came from either lawful authority or lawless power. Sam couldn't tell which. They moved down the main street without stopping, their faces shadowed beneath hat brims. One of them glanced toward the boarding house, and Sam felt the weight of that look even from a distance. Martha stepped out onto the porch, drying her hands on a dish towel. She watched the riders until they disappeared into the darkness beyond town. "Friends of yours?" Sam asked. "Clarence Whitmore's men," Martha said, and there was something careful in her voice. "Whitmore owns the biggest mine, most of the land around here, and has his fingers in just about everything else. Those are the men who make sure everyone remembers it. The sheriff doesn't mind. The sheriff works for whoever pays best, and that's always been Whitmore." Martha sat in the chair next to Sam's. "You seem like a decent man, Mr. Bridger, so I'll tell you straight. Redemption Creek's got troubles under the surface. Most folks are good people, but they're scared. Scared of losing what little they have. Scared of asking the wrong questions? What kind of questions?" Martha was quiet for a long moment. "Questions about who really owns what. About where certain deeds went. About why some men get rich while others lose everything." She stood up, folding her towel with precise movements. "But like I said, it's quiet here. And maybe that's all an old woman should hope for. Good night, Mr. Bridger." She went inside, leaving Sam alone with his thoughts and the journal in his hands. He opened to a blank page near the back, one of the few remaining, and wrote the date, September 15th, 1889. Then he wrote, "Redemption Creek. Maybe home." He closed the journal and sat there a while longer, breathing in the cool mountain air, listening to the sounds of a small town, settling into sleep. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked. Wind rustled through pine trees on the slopes above town. It was peaceful. Sam didn't know then that peace was about to shatter, that within hours he'd be standing in chains, or that the silver star branded into his forearm would become the only thing standing between him and a hangman's rope. He didn't know that the quiet town he'd chosen for rest was about to demand everything he'd hoped to leave behind, but he would have come anyway. Because Sam Bridger had learned long ago that you don't choose the fight chooses you. And when it does, a man either stands up or learns to live with looking away. He just didn't know the fight was already coming for him, riding through the darkness on horses with Clarence Whitmore's brand. Sam woke to shouting in the street below. Early morning light filtered through the thin curtains, and for a moment he lay still, orienting himself to the unfamiliar room. Then the shouting came again, urgent and frightened. And he was out of bed and pulling on his clothes with the practiced speed of someone who'd learned that. Hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. By the time he reached the boarding house porch, a crowd had gathered near the assay office. Sam could see Martha already there, her hand pressed to her mouth. He walked quickly toward the commotion, moving through the gathered townspeople until he could see what had drawn them. A man lay in the narrow alley between the assay office and the claims registry building. Even from where Sam stood, he could see the unnatural angle of the body, the dark stain spreading across the dusty ground. Dead, no question about it. Everyone step back, a voice commanded. A heavy-set man in his mid-40s pushed through the crowd, a tarnished badge pinned to his vest. Sheriff Vernon Polk had the look of someone who'd once been strong, but had let whiskey and easy money soften him. His eyes were sharp, though, moving over the scene with calculation. I said, "Step back. This is official business." Sam stayed where he was, his trained eye taking in details. The dead man wore a clerk's clothes, pressed shirt, sleeve garters, spectacles lying broken a few feet from the body. Middle-aged, thinning hair, ink stains on his fingers. The kind of man who worked with papers and numbers, not the kind who usually ended up dead in an alley. "That's Edgar Finch," someone in the crowd murmured. "Works in the claims office." "Worked," another voice corrected quietly. Sheriff Polk knelt beside the body, and Sam noticed how carefully he avoided actually touching anything. Another man appeared, younger, maybe 26, wearing a deputy's badge and carrying himself with more genuine concern than the sheriff. He crouched next to Finch, checking for a pulse, even though it was clearly pointless. "He's gone, Tom," the sheriff said. "He'd been dead a few hours, looks like." The deputy, Tom, stood slowly, his face troubled. "What happened to him? What does it look like?" "Someone stuck a knife in him." Sheriff Polk pointed to a wound in Finch's side, then gestured to something lying near the body. "And unless I'm mistaken, that's the knife that did it." Sam's chest tightened as he recognized the weapon. It was his, a distinctive hunting knife with a bone handle and brass guard, one he'd carried for 20 years. He'd last seen it on his bedside table when he'd gone down for breakfast. "Anyone recognize this knife?" the sheriff asked, holding it up for the crowd to see. Sam knew he should speak up immediately, explained that the knife was his, but that he hadn't used it. But something stopped him, the way the sheriff's eyes scanned the crowd, the faint satisfaction in his expression. This felt wrong, staged. "I've seen that knife," a voice said. Sam turned to see a thin man in a shopkeeper's apron, pointing directly at him. "That stranger's been carrying it. Saw it on his belt yesterday when he came through town." Other heads turned. Eyes found Sam, and he could feel the shift in the crowd's mood. Curiosity turning to suspicion. "That true?" Sheriff Polk asked, walking towards Sam. "This your knife, stranger?" "It's my knife," Sam admitted, "but I didn't use it to kill anyone. It was taken from my room, sometime between last night and this morning." "Taken from your room." The sheriff's tone made it clear what he thought of that explanation. "That's convenient. You got anyone who can verify you were in your room all night?" "I was alone in my room, yes. I'm staying at Mrs. Henley's boarding house." Martha stepped forward. "Sheriff, Mr. Bridger checked in yesterday evening. He's been nothing but respectful and quiet." "I can't imagine what you can imagine isn't evidence, Martha." The sheriff cut her off. He turned back to Sam. "What's your name?" "Samuel Bridger." "And what brings you to Redemption Creek, Mr. Bridger?" "Looking for work." "Looking for a place to settle down." Funny way to settle down, killing a claims clerk. The sheriff moved closer, and Sam could smell yesterday's whiskey on his breath. "We got witnesses say they saw you and Finch arguing yesterday afternoon." "That true?" Sam's mind raced. He hadn't even known who Finch was until this morning, had certainly never argued with him. "No, sir. I never met the man. That's not what I heard." The sheriff looked past Sam to the crowd. "Who was it told me they saw these two going at it?" Two men stepped forward, both wearing the same kind of dust-covered work clothes. "Miners," Sam guessed, or men who wanted to look like miners. They both avoided Sam's eyes. "We saw them," one said. "Yesterday late afternoon behind the general store. This fellow," he pointed at Sam, "he was telling Finch he'd better do what he was told or there'd be consequences." It was a lie, smooth and practiced. Sam studied the men carefully, memorizing their faces. Someone had paid them to say this, or threatened them, or both. I was at the boarding house all afternoon, Sam said calmly. Mrs. Henley can confirm that, but Martha's face had gone pale. I was out for a few hours yesterday afternoon, she said quietly, visiting Mrs. Chen, who's been poorly. I can't say for certain where Mr. Bridger was during that time. The trap was neat and thorough. Sam felt old instincts stirring, the awareness that he was being cornered, that someone had planned this carefully. But who and why? I think you'd better come with me, Mr. Bridger, the sheriff said, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. We'll sort this all out at the courthouse. I didn't kill that man. Then you won't mind answering some questions. The sheriff's smile didn't reach his eyes. Deputy Reeves, search his room at the boarding house. See what else you can find. The young deputy looked uncomfortable but nodded. Martha started to protest, but Sam caught her eye and gave a small shake of his head. Fighting now would only make things worse. As the sheriff led him toward the courthouse, a 2-story stone building that also served as the jail, Sam's mind worked through what he knew. Someone had stolen his knife. Someone had killed Edgar Finch. Someone had arranged for false witnesses to place Sam in an argument with the victim. This wasn't random violence. This was murder disguised as frontier justice, and Sam was meant to hang for it. The question was why. He'd been in town less than a day. He didn't know Finch, didn't know anyone except Martha. Unless this wasn't about him at all, unless he was simply convenient. A stranger, unknown, with no connections or friends to vouch for him. The perfect scapegoat. The courthouse jail was a row of cells in the basement, damp and dark. The sheriff locked Sam in the furthest cell and stood there for a moment, studying him through the bars. You picked the wrong town to drift into, friend, he said. Wrong place, wrong time. Who killed Edgar Finch? Sam asked. You did, apparently. No, I mean who really killed him, and why frame me for it? The sheriff's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Acknowledgement, maybe, or calculation. Save your questions for the judge. Trial's tomorrow morning. Justice moves quick in Redemption Creek. Too quick, Sam thought. A man was dead, and they wanted to close the case before anyone could ask uncomfortable questions. That meant Finch's death mattered to someone powerful. That meant there were secrets someone would kill to protect. He thought about the riders he'd seen last night, Whitmore's men, Martha had called them. Thought about what she'd said about questions people were afraid to ask. Questions about deeds and ownership and who really controlled what. An hour later, Deputy Reeves came down the stairs, carrying Sam's saddlebag. The young man's face was troubled as he set it outside the cell. Found this in your room, he said. Sheriff wants it as evidence. Evidence of what? I don't know. Just following orders. Reeves hesitated, then lowered his voice. Look, I don't know what's going on here, but something doesn't sit right. Finch was a good man, honest, and these past few weeks he seemed worried about something. Worried about what? Don't know. But he kept asking questions, about old claims, about property transfers, like he was looking for something that didn't add up. Reeves glanced toward the stairs, making sure they were alone. I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I found something else in the alley. Before the sheriff got there, he pulled a folded paper from his pocket and passed it through the bars. Sam unfolded it carefully. It was a mining claim deed, creased and stained with what might have been blood. The document showed a transfer of property from someone named Hoskins to Clarence Whitmore, dated 3 years ago. But there was something odd about it. The signature looked recent, the ink too fresh compared to the rest of the document. Finch was holding this when he died, Reeves said. I took it before the sheriff could see. Seemed important somehow. Why would a claims clerk be carrying a deed in an alley in the middle of the night? That's what I've been wondering. Reeves took the paper back, tucking it away quickly. Look, I'm not saying you didn't do this. I'm not saying you did. I'm just saying there might be more to it. There is more to it, Sam said. Someone wanted Finch dead, and they wanted it to look like a drifter's crime. Quick, clean, no questions asked. If that's true, why would they go to all this trouble? Because Finch found something. Something worth killing for. And whoever did it needed someone to blame before anyone could look too close. Reeves studied Sam for a long moment. You're not just some drifter, are you? No, I'm not. Then who are you? Sam considered how much to reveal. Someone who used to make a living finding the truth. And I'm telling you the truth now. I didn't kill Edgar Finch, but I'd like to help you find out who did. The deputy's expression shifted, uncertainty warring with duty. Finally, he nodded slightly. Trials tomorrow morning. Judge Harlan Blackwood presides. Well, you'll see for yourself. After Reeves left, Sam lay on the narrow cot and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, he'd stand trial for a murder he didn't commit, in a town where justice apparently belonged to whoever had the most money and power. The old Sam, the one who'd spent 30 years tracking killers and thieves, would have fought this, would have demanded proper investigation, would have stood on principle. But that Sam was tired. That Sam had come to Redemption Creek hoping to leave all the fighting behind. The question now was whether he could afford that luxury. Whether letting himself hang for convenience was the same as letting a murderer go free. Whether 30 years of seeking justice meant anything if he didn't seek it now. When his own life hung in the balance, he thought about the silver star branded into his forearm, put there by the organization that had employed him. A mark that identified him as one of the elite hunters who tracked the worst criminals across the territories. He'd earned that brand. It meant something. Tomorrow he decided they would see it. Tomorrow he would remind them that some men didn't hang easy and some truths didn't stay buried. Tomorrow he would fight. The courthouse filled before dawn. Sam could hear the shuffle of feet, the murmur of voices above him as townspeople crowded into the courtroom. Word of a trial traveled fast in small towns, and apparently murder trials traveled fastest of all. People wanted to see justice done, or what passed for justice in Redemption Creek. Deputy Reeves came for him just after sunrise, unlocking the cell with hands that weren't quite steady. Time, he said simply. Sam stood, straightening his shirt as best he could. His clothes were dusty from the night in the cell, but he carried himself with quiet dignity as Reeves led him up the stairs. Whatever happened in the next few hours, he wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him broken. The courtroom was smaller than he'd expected, with rough wooden benches packed with spectators. Morning light streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes in the air. At the front of the room sat Judge Harlan Blackwood on a raised platform, looking down at everyone with the expression of a man who'd grown comfortable with power. Blackwood was in his early 60s, with silver hair swept back from a broad forehead and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore a black coat that might have been impressive 20 years ago, but now looked shabby at the edges. Everything about him suggested a man who'd once been something more, and was determined to pretend he still was. "Bring the prisoner forward," Blackwood said, his voice carrying easily through the crowded room. Sam walked to the front, aware of every eye on him. He spotted Martha sitting near the back, her face drawn with worry. Sheriff Polk lounged against the wall, arms crossed, looking pleased with himself. And there, in the front row, sat a man Sam hadn't seen before, well-dressed, maybe 50 years old, with the kind of confidence that came from owning things and people. Clarence Whitmore, Sam guessed. Come to watch his plan unfold. Samuel Bridger, the judge said, reading from a paper in front of him. You stand accused of the murder of Edgar Finch, claims clerk of Redemption Creek. How do you answer to this charge? Not guilty, Your Honor. Not guilty. Blackwood's tone suggested he found this amusing. Despite the fact that your knife was found at the scene, covered in the victim's blood. Despite multiple witnesses who place you in conflict with the deceased. Not guilty. The knife was stolen from my room, Your Honor, and I never met Edgar Finch, let alone argued with him. We'll see what the evidence says. Sheriff Polk, present your case. The trial that followed was a mockery of justice, though it was conducted with all the proper forms. Sheriff Polk laid out the prosecution's version of events in careful detail. The knife, Sam's knife, was presented as evidence. The two witnesses repeated their story about seeing Sam argue with Finch. Another witness, a woman who ran a boarding house 2 streets over, claimed she'd seen Sam walking toward the claims office area around the time of the murder. Sam listened carefully to each lie, each half-truth. Someone had planned this thoroughly, anticipated questions, prepared answers. But no plan was perfect. No lie held up forever under scrutiny. When it was his turn to speak, Sam stood and addressed the court with the calm authority of someone who'd testified in dozens of trials, usually on the other side. "Your Honor, I'd like to question the witnesses." Judge Blackwood raised an eyebrow. "You're representing yourself?" "I don't see that I have much choice. And yes, I'd like to question those who've testified against me." The judge made a show of considering, then waved his hand. "Proceed, but be brief. We're not going to spend all day on this." Sam turned to the first witness, the miner who'd claimed to see him arguing with Finch. "You said you saw me behind the general store yesterday afternoon, arguing with the deceased. What time was this?" The man shifted uncomfortably. "Around 4 o'clock, I'd say. And what were you doing behind the general store at 4 o'clock? "Just passing through." "Passing through an alley? Where were you coming from and where were you going?" The man's eyes darted to Sheriff Polk, then back. "I don't remember exactly. Just walking around. You remember the exact time of day, but not where you were walking or why." "Objection," the sheriff called out, badgering the witness. "Sustained," Judge Blackwood said quickly. "Move on, Mr. Bridger." Sam let it go. The inconsistency was noted, if by no one else, then by him. He questioned the second witness similarly, finding more small contradictions, more places where the story didn't quite hold together. The woman who claimed to have seen him walking, Sam established that she would have been at least 200 yards away in fading light, oddly close enough to identify a stranger with certainty. But Judge Blackwood dismissed each point, growing more impatient with every question Sam asked. "Enough," the judge finally said. "The evidence is clear. Your knife, multiple witnesses, your presence in town at the time of death. Unless you have something more substantial than nitpicking witness testimony, I see no reason to delay judgment." This was the moment. Sam had thought about it all night, weighed the risks. Revealing who he was might save him, or it might make things worse if the corruption ran deep enough. But he was out of options. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence of my own." "What evidence?" Sam unbuttoned his shirt cuff and rolled up his left sleeve. The courtroom fell silent as the brand was revealed. A silver star, about 2 inches across, burned into the skin of his forearm. The mark was old, the scar tissue long since healed, but unmistakable. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even Judge Blackwood leaned forward, his expression shifting from irritation to something more complex. "That's the mark of the outlaw hunters," someone whispered loudly. "I've heard about those. Elite trackers, worked for the territorial government." Sam kept his arm extended, letting everyone see. "For 30 years, Your Honor, I tracked criminals across the Montana and Wyoming territories. Over 200 successful captures. Murderers, thieves, men who thought they could disappear into the mountains and never be found. I found them. I brought them to justice." "That's quite a claim," Blackwood said, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. "I have my journal as proof. 30 years of cases, documented in detail. Names, dates, locations. It's in my saddlebag, which Deputy Reeves confiscated from my room." Sam looked directly at the judge. "I'm not the kind of man who commits murder in an alley. I'm the kind of man who solves them." Judge Blackwood sat back, his fingers drumming on the bench. Sam could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. This complicated things. A drifter was one thing, easy to convict, easy to forget. But a man with credentials, with a documented history of law enforcement, that was different. That would raise questions outside Redemption Creek. "Sheriff," the judge said, "fetch the prisoner's saddlebag. Let's see this journal." While they waited, Sam felt the atmosphere in the courtroom shift. People were whispering, reassessing. Martha caught his eye and gave him a small nod of encouragement. But Clarence Whitmore, if that's who the well-dressed man was, sat stone-faced, his expression unreadable. Deputy Reeves returned with the saddlebag and handed Sam the worn leather journal. Sam passed it to the judge, who flipped through the pages with growing attention. Whatever else Blackwood was, he could apparently read well enough to understand what he was looking at. "These are detailed records," the judge admitted. "Cases dating back decades. Descriptions of criminals, circumstances of capture." He looked up at Sam, This appears genuine. It is genuine, Your Honor. And that brand isn't something a man can fake. It's burned into the skin by a territorial commissioner, witnessed by 3 officials. It marks me as someone who spent his life upholding the law, not breaking it. The judge closed the journal slowly. This is unexpected. The court will take a brief recess to consider this new information. Your Honor, Sheriff Polk stepped forward. I don't see what difference this makes. A brand doesn't prove innocence. Plenty of lawmen have gone bad over the years. Nevertheless, Sheriff, this court will not rush to judgment on a man with Mr. Bridges' apparent credentials. 1 hour recess. As the judge stood and left through a side door, Sam noticed him gesture to Sheriff Polk and Whitmore to follow. The 3 men disappeared together, and Sam knew exactly what was happening. They were deciding how to handle this complication, this unexpected wrinkle in their plan. Martha pushed through the crowd to reach him. That brand, she said quietly. It's real. It's real. Earned it when I was 28 years old, after 5 years of proving myself. Only about 50 men ever carried that mark. Then they have to let you go. Maybe, or maybe they'll decide that my past makes me an even better scapegoat. Who'd question the conviction of a manhunter gone rogue? Deputy Reeves approached, his expression thoughtful. I need to ask you something, he said in a low voice. If you're who you say you are, why didn't you tell us right away? Why wait until the trial? Because I'm tired, Deputy. I came here hoping to leave all that behind. And because I wanted to see how this would play out, who was pulling the strings. Sam met the young man's eyes. Now I know. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I don't understand. Yes, you do. You gave me that deed yesterday. You know something's wrong here. Edgar Finch was murdered because he found something, and now someone's trying to bury the truth by burying me. You're either part of that, or you're not. Reeves looked away, struggling with something internal. Finally he said, I became a deputy because I believed in doing right. My mother raised me to stand up for what's fair, even when it's hard, even when it costs you. Then help me find out what Finch discovered. Help me understand why he had to die. Before Reeves could respond, Martha touched Sam's arm. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have mentioned earlier, but I was afraid. She glanced around, making sure no one was close enough to hear. Come to my house tonight if the judge lets you go. I have documents, papers my husband collected before he died. He suspected something was wrong with the land claims, the way Whitmore kept acquiring properties. He was investigating when his heart gave out. You think it really was his heart? Martha's face went pale. I don't know. I've wondered. But I was too afraid to look closer, too afraid of what I might find. If I'm released, I'll come. But Martha, this is dangerous. If Whitmore killed Finch to protect secrets, then those secrets need to come out, she said firmly. Edgar Finch was a good man. He deserves justice. And if my Henry died because of this, then I owe it to his memory to see it through. The judge returned, followed by the sheriff and Whitmore. Judge Blackwood's expression was carefully neutral as he took his seat. This court has considered the new evidence presented by the defendant, he announced. While the brand and journal are impressive, they do not conclusively prove innocence in this matter. However, given Mr. Bridges' apparent background, this court believes further investigation is warranted before rendering a verdict. Sam felt a mix of relief and frustration. Not acquitted, but not convicted either. The trial will continue tomorrow morning, the judge continued. Additional witnesses will be called. The defendant will remain in custody pending further proceedings. Court adjourned. As Deputy Reeves led him back to the cells, Sam caught the look that passed between Whitmore and the sheriff, a look that said this complication needed to be resolved permanently if necessary. They'd bought time, but time to do what? Find more false witnesses, arrange an accident, or time for Sam to find the truth? Back in his cell, Sam sat on the cot and thought about Edgar Finch, a claims clerk who'd noticed something wrong and had the courage to investigate. A man who'd paid for that courage with his life. And now Sam was being offered a choice. Let himself be convicted to keep the peace or fight back and risk everything. It wasn't really a choice at all. Not for a man who'd spent 30 years hunting criminals. Not for a man who wore the Silver Star brand on his arm. Tomorrow morning, one way or another, the truth would start coming out. The courthouse bells had long since marked midnight when Sam heard footsteps on the stairs. He'd been awake, staring at the ceiling, running through everything he knew and everything he suspected. The pieces were there, scattered like a puzzle someone had deliberately knocked to the floor. He just needed to put them together. The footsteps were quiet, hesitant. Not the sheriff's heavy tread or even Deputy Reeves's steady pace. These belonged to someone who didn't want to be heard. A figure appeared in the dim lamplight. Deputy Reeves, but out of uniform, wearing plain clothes and carrying a bundle under his arm. His face was tight with the kind of tension that came from crossing a line you couldn't uncross. "I shouldn't be here," Reeves said quietly, glancing back toward the stairs. "But you are." The deputy moved closer to the cell, setting the bundle down. "I've been thinking about what you said, about doing what's right even when it costs you. My mother used to say that. She died when I was 16, but I still hear her voice sometimes, telling me to stand up straight and look truth in the eye. Sounds like she was a wise woman." She was, and she would have been ashamed of what's happening here. Reeves pulled a key from his pocket, but didn't move to unlock the cell. "Not yet. I need to ask you something first, and I need you to be straight with me. Did you kill Edgar Finch?" Sam met the young man's eyes. "No, I didn't. Can you prove it?" "Not yet, but I can find who did if you give me the chance." Reeves was quiet for a long moment, weighing something. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Edgar Finch came to me 3 weeks ago. He said he'd found something wrong with some of the mining claims. Documents that didn't match up, signatures that looked recent on old deeds. He wanted to investigate properly, through legal channels. I told him to take it to the sheriff. I'm guessing the sheriff wasn't interested. The sheriff told him to mind his own business, said claim disputes were for lawyers, not clerks." Reeves shook his head. "But Edgar wouldn't let it go. He kept digging. He told me just a few days ago that he'd found proof, documentation that would expose years of fraud. And then he turned up dead, with your knife in him, and witnesses ready to testify against a stranger nobody knew or cared about." Reeves finally unlocked the cell door, but he didn't swing it open. "I'm not letting you escape, Mr. Bridger, but I am going to show you something, and then you can decide what we do next." Sam followed the deputy up the stairs, through the dark courthouse, and into the small office that served as the claims registry. Reeves lit a lamp, keeping the flame low, and moved to a filing cabinet in the corner. "After Edgar died, I came here and looked around. The sheriff and his men had already been through everything, said they were looking for evidence. But I know what evidence looks like when someone's trying to hide it, not find it." He pulled out a thick ledger, the kind used for recording official transactions. "This is the current claims record. Every mining property in the district, who owns it, when it was transferred." He set it on the desk, then reached behind the cabinet and pulled out another ledger, older, more worn. "And this is the record from 15 years ago, when my mother's cousin was the claims clerk. I found it hidden behind this cabinet, wrapped in oilcloth like someone wanted to preserve it, but keep it out of sight." Sam opened both ledgers side by side and began comparing entries. It didn't take long to see the pattern. Claims that had been recorded under one name 15 years ago were now listed under different names, primarily under Clarence Whitmore's name or his various business entities, but the transfer dates didn't match up with any intermediate sales or transfers. "These properties just jumped from the original owners to Whitmore," Sam said. "No record of purchase, no proper documentation of transfer. It's as if the old records were simply erased and new ones written." That's what Edgar figured out. Someone's been systematically altering the claims records, making it look legal when it's not. All those miners who thought they were selling to Whitmore or defaulting on debts, some of them might have legitimate claims to land they think they lost. How much land are we talking about? Based on what I've seen, maybe a third of the productive claims in the district. Millions of dollars worth over time. Sam sat back, processing this. It was a massive fraud, the kind that required cooperation from multiple officials. The claims clerk to alter records, the sheriff to discourage questions, a judge to rule in favor of Whitmore whenever disputes arose. A complete corruption of the system. Edgar Finch found this, Sam said, and he wanted to expose it, so Whitmore had him killed. But why frame you? Why not just make it look like a robbery? Because Edgar was smart. He must have hidden evidence somewhere, documentation that proves the fraud. If his death looked random, people might go through his things, might find what he'd hidden. But if his death was tied to a specific killer, someone caught and convicted quickly, then everyone stops looking. Case closed. Evidence forgotten. Reeves pulled out a folded paper from his pocket, the bloodied deed he'd shown Sam earlier. This is what Edgar was holding when he died. Look at the date of the signature. Sam examined it carefully. The deed was dated 3 years ago, but the ink of the signature was fresh, maybe days old. Someone was forging a new signature on an old document, trying to make a fraudulent transfer look legitimate, and Edgar caught them at it. Or he confronted them with proof of what they'd done. Reeves's hands clenched into fists. They killed him because he was honest, because he wouldn't look the other way, which means the evidence he gathered is still out there somewhere. Whitmore and his people are still looking for it, which is why they ransacked the claims office. They haven't found it yet. So where would Edgar hide something that important? Sam thought about it, drawing on 30 years of experience tracking men and understanding how people thought when they were frightened. Somewhere safe but accessible. Somewhere he could get to if he needed it, but where casual searching wouldn't find it. Did he have family? Close friends? No family in town. His parents died years ago. He lived alone in a room above the dry goods store. As for friends, Reeves paused. He was friendly with Mrs. Henley, used to eat breakfast at her boarding house most mornings. Martha. Sam felt pieces clicking together. She said her husband collected documents about corruption before he died. What if Edgar knew about those documents? What if he added his own evidence to them? You think Mrs. Henley has what Edgar found? I think it's worth asking. But carefully. If Whitmore suspects she has evidence, she's in danger. Reeves nodded slowly. All right, but first we need to deal with your trial. It reconvenes in a few hours, and the judge is going to push for a quick verdict. We need to buy more time. How? I have an idea. It's risky and it might cost me my badge. But if you're right about all this, then my badge isn't worth keeping if it means protecting murderers and thieves. Sam studied the young deputy with new respect. It was one thing to have doubts. It was another to act on them, knowing the cost. Your mother would be proud of you. I hope so. Now let's get you back to that cell before someone notices you're gone. And Mr. Bridger, when this goes to trial tomorrow, I need you to trust me. No matter what I do or say, trust that I'm trying to get to the truth. They returned to the basement cell, and Reeves locked the door behind Sam. But something had changed. Sam was no longer alone in this. He had an ally, someone on the inside who could help navigate the corruption. The question now was whether they could move fast enough. Because if Whitmore realized they were closing in on the evidence, he wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who stood in his way. Edgar Finch had learned that lesson too late. Sam was determined not to repeat his mistake. As dawn broke over Redemption Creek, Sam heard the town coming to life above him. Footsteps, voices, the sounds of another day beginning. Somewhere in this town, hidden in an attic or beneath a floorboard or tucked in a forgotten corner, was the proof they needed. The documentation that Edgar Finch had died protecting. Sam rolled up his sleeve and looked at the silver star branded into his skin. For 30 years, this mark had opened doors, commanded respect, given him authority to pursue justice. But in Redemption Creek it wasn't enough. Here money talked louder than credentials. Power outweighed honor, but that was about to change. Because Sam Bridger hadn't spent 3 decades hunting criminals without learning a few things about how corruption worked. It always had weak points, always relied on fear keeping people silent. And fear only worked until someone stood up and said enough. This morning in that courtroom, someone was going to stand up. The trial resumed with the same packed crowd, the same atmosphere of anticipation. Judge Blackwood looked refreshed, his confidence restored after yesterday's disruption. Sheriff Polk leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, smug satisfaction on his face. And Clarence Whitmore sat in the front row, watching everything with the detached interest of a man watching a play he'd already seen. "Before we proceed," Judge Blackwood announced, "I want to make it clear that while the defendant's past service is noted, it does not exempt him from justice. We will hear additional testimony this morning, and then this court will render its verdict." Sam noticed Deputy Reeves standing near the door, his face carefully neutral. Whatever plan the young man had, it was about to unfold. "Sheriff Polk, call your first witness," the sheriff straightened. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Deputy Thomas Reeves to the stand." The surprise was evident in the courtroom's murmur. Reeves walked forward and took his position, raising his right hand to swear his oath. His voice was steady, showing none of the nervousness Sam knew he must feel. "Deputy Reeves," the sheriff began, "you were among the first to arrive at the scene of Edgar Finch's murder. Tell the court what you observed." "I observed the deceased lying in the alley, a knife wound in his side. The defendant's knife was nearby. And did you form an opinion about what had occurred?" Reeves paused, and Sam saw the moment of decision in his eyes. "Initially, yes. The scene appeared to show a clear case of murder with obvious evidence. But upon closer examination, certain elements troubled me." Sheriff Polk's expression tightened. "What elements?" "The knife wound, while fatal, showed characteristics inconsistent with the primary cause of death. There were powder burns on the victim's clothing, suggesting he'd been shot at close range with a small caliber weapon. The knife wound appeared to be inflicted after death." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Blackwood banged his gavel. "Order! Deputy, are you saying Edgar Finch was shot?" "Yes, Your Honor. Shot with what I believe was a small derringer or similar weapon, then stabbed post-mortem to create false evidence." "This is preposterous," Sheriff Polk sputtered. "Your Honor, the deputy is clearly confused about what he saw." "I'm not confused, Sheriff. I know what powder burns look like, and I know the difference between a wound inflicted on a living person and one inflicted after death. The knife was staged." Sam watched Clarence Whitmore's face go pale, watched his hand move instinctively to his vest pocket where a small derringer might be concealed. It was a brief gesture, quickly controlled, but Sam caught it. Judge Blackwood looked shaken. "If this is true, Sheriff, it represents a serious failing in the investigation. The boy is mistaken." "Your Honor, probably his first murder scene. Got confused by the circumstances." "I'm not mistaken." Reeves's voice grew stronger. "And there's more. Edgar Finch came to me 3 weeks ago with concerns about fraudulent mining claims. He said he'd found evidence of systematic record alteration spanning years. I believe he was murdered to prevent him from exposing that fraud." "Your Honor," Sheriff Polk said loudly, "this is complete speculation and has nothing to do with the case at hand." But Sam stood up. "It has everything to do with the case, Your Honor. I was framed for Edgar Finch's murder to prevent investigation into why he was really killed. Deputy Reeves is confirming what I've suspected from the beginning. This was never about me. It was about silencing a man who discovered the truth." Judge Blackwood's face had gone red. "This is highly irregular. Deputy, do you have any proof of these allegations?" "I have the claims records, Your Honor, both current and historical. They show a pattern of property transfers that appear fraudulent." "Enough." The judge's voice cracked like thunder. "This court will not be turned into a circus. Deputy Reeves, you are dismissed, and you're suspended from duty pending review of these wild accusations." But Reeves didn't move. "Your Honor, with respect, I took an oath to uphold the law." "That's what I'm doing." The judge started to respond, but Martha Henley stood up from her seat in the back. "If the deputy is suspended for telling the truth, Your Honor, then this town has lost its way completely." Other voices joined hers. Townspeople who'd sat silent, afraid, suddenly finding courage in numbers. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, but the murmur of dissent grew. Sam saw his moment. "Your Honor, I request permission to examine the body." If Deputy Reeves is correct about the powder burns, it should be easy to verify. The body has been prepared for burial, Sheriff Polk said quickly. Then let's examine it before burial, unless someone has a reason to prevent that examination. Judge Blackwood looked trapped, his eyes moving between Sam, the deputy, the restless crowd, and Clarence Whitmore. Finally he spoke, his voice tight. This court stands in recess until tomorrow morning. The defendant will remain in custody. Deputy Reeves will produce these alleged records for inspection, and someone will examine the deceased to verify or refute these claims about powder burns. As the judge fled to his chambers, Sam caught Whitmore staring at him with naked hatred. The careful plan was unraveling, and desperate men did desperate things. Sam would have to be ready. That evening, as shadows lengthened across Redemption Creek, Martha Henley arrived at the courthouse, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. The guard at the door, a man the sheriff had hired, not Deputy Reeves, looked at her with suspicion. I'm bringing supper to Mr. Bridger, Martha said firmly, unless this town has started starving its prisoners before trial. The guard hesitated, then stepped aside. Everyone knew Martha Henley. She'd lived in Redemption Creek longer than most, had nursed half the town through illness at one time or another. Even hired toughs thought twice before crossing her. She found Sam in his cell, sitting on the edge of his cot. He stood when she entered, and she saw the calculation in his eyes, the way he measured distances, angles, potential threats. This was a man who'd spent his life in dangerous situations. I brought stew, Martha said, loud enough for the guard upstairs to hear. Then quieter, and something else. She set the basket down and began unpacking. The stew was real enough, still warm in its covered pot. But beneath the food, wrapped in layers of cloth, was a leather portfolio tied with string. My husband's documents, she whispered. Everything he collected about the land fraud before he died. And there's more. I found something hidden in my attic this afternoon, a loose board in the corner. Behind it was another portfolio, newer. Edgar Finch must have put it there. He had breakfast at my place the morning he died. He could have hidden it then when I was in the kitchen. Sam's heart quickened as he carefully unwrapped the portfolios. The first contained maps, deeds, handwritten notes in a careful script, Martha's husband's investigation. The second was Edgar Finch's work, more recent, more detailed. Finch had done what any good investigator would do. He documented everything methodically. Building an airtight case, there were copies of original claim registrations, then copies of the altered versions showing fraudulent transfers, photographs of pages from the old ledgers, notarized statements from miners who'd been forced off their land, and most damning of all, a ledger in Finch's own handwriting showing payments, bribes, essentially, from Clarence Whitmore to various officials. Judge Harlan Blackwood had received $5,000 over the past 3 years. Sheriff Vernon Polk even more. The claims clerk before Finch, a man who'd conveniently left town 2 years ago, had been paid handsomely for his cooperation. This is everything we need, Sam said quietly. This proves the entire conspiracy. Edgar was thorough. He knew what he was facing. Martha's voice caught. He came to me that morning, the day he died. Said he wanted me to keep something safe just in case. I didn't understand then, but I do now. He knew they might kill him, and he wanted to make sure the truth survived even if he didn't. Sam looked at her carefully. Martha, this makes you dangerous to them. If Whitmore suspects you have this, let him suspect. I'm done being afraid. But her hands trembled as she said it. My Henry died investigating this, even if it was listed as natural causes. Edgar Finch died for it. How many others have been hurt, cheated, driven from their homes? Someone has to stand up. Someone is standing up. You are, but we need to be smart about this. If I show this evidence in court tomorrow, Whitmore will know where it came from. He'll come after you. Then what do we do? Sam thought for a moment, the way he'd thought through countless dangerous situations over the years. The direct approach wasn't always the best approach. Sometimes you had to create chaos, force your opponents to make mistakes, reveal themselves. We set a trap, he said. Tomorrow in court, I'll reveal some of what Finch found, but not all of it. Enough to panic Whitmore, to make him think the evidence might be somewhere else. He'll move quickly to cover his tracks, to silence anyone who might talk. That's when he'll make mistakes. That's asking Deputy Reeves to risk his life. Reeves already made that choice when he testified this morning. He's in this now, whether we like it or not. Sam met her eyes. But you need to be somewhere safe. Is there anyone in town you trust completely? The Chen family. Mrs. Chen was my closest friend before she took ill. Her sons would protect me. Go to them tonight. Take these documents. Hide them somewhere even I don't know about. And Martha, he reached through the bars and took her hand. Thank you for believing in me, for having the courage to do this. She squeezed his hand, and for a moment they were just two people who'd lived long enough to understand the cost of doing right. Then she packed up the basket, leaving him the stew but taking the portfolios. After she left, Sam ate slowly, thinking through what tomorrow would bring. The evidence was secure. Deputy Reeves was committed. The truth was finally going to come out. But the space between now and justice was dangerous ground, and Clarence Whitmore was a cornered animal. Near midnight, Sam heard sounds from upstairs, raised voices, a scuffle. Then footsteps running, and Deputy Reeves appeared at the top of the basement stairs, breathing hard. They're coming, Reeves said, fumbling with the cell keys. 3 of Whitmore's men. They paid off the guard, told him to take a walk. They're planning to break you out, then shoot you trying to escape. Classic. Sam had seen it before. The convenient death that closed an inconvenient case. Reeves unlocked the cell. We need to get you out of here. There's a back way through the storage rooms. No. Sam didn't move. That's what they want. Be running, them chasing, a body turning up somewhere outside town. Better to face them here, where there are witnesses. There are no witnesses. They made sure of that. You're a witness. I'm suspended, remember? My testimony won't mean anything, Sam smiled grimly. And I guess we'll have to make this interesting enough that it can't be covered up. The footsteps were closer now, heavy boots on wooden stairs. Sam moved to the shadows beside his cell door, taking up a position where he'd have the advantage of surprise. Reeves drew his sidearm, his hand steady despite the fear in his eyes. 3 men appeared, rough types, the kind who did unpleasant work for unpleasant pay. The leader, a scarred man with a week's worth of beard, held a ring of keys he must have gotten from the guard. Evening, Deputy, the man said, his tone conversational. We're here to move the prisoner. Judge's orders. The judge didn't give any orders, Cobb, and you're not law enforcement. Doesn't matter what we are. Prisoners coming with us, over my dead body. Cobb's smile was cold. That can be arranged. The moment stretched. 3 men with guns facing 1 deputy. Sam knew how this would play out if he didn't act. Reeves would die trying to protect him, and then Sam would die anyway. Sometimes the only way to win was to change the rules. Sam stepped out of the shadows. Gentlemen, I have a proposition. You tell me who sent you, who's paying for this, and I'll come along quietly. No shooting, no fuss. We already know who sent them, Reeves said. Yes, but I want to hear them say it. I want witnesses to testify that Clarence Whitmore ordered my execution. Sam moved closer to the bars. Because that's what this is, not a jailbreak. An execution dressed up to look legal. Cobb's eyes narrowed. You talk too much, old man. Maybe, but I've been doing this kind of work since before you learned to shave. Tracking men, catching men, understanding what makes them do stupid things for money. And right now, you're about to do something very stupid, is that right? And that's right. Because if you pull those triggers, you're not just killing a prisoner and a deputy. You're committing murder in an official courthouse, leaving bodies that can't be explained away. The territorial marshal will come. Federal investigators. Every crooked deal Whitmore's made, every bribe he's paid, it'll all come out. Your boss will hang, and he'll make sure you hang first. Sam could see the calculation happening in Cobb's eyes, the doubt creeping in. These weren't cold-blooded killers. They were hired muscle, men who did rough work, but usually stopped short of actual murder. But if you walk away now, Sam continued, tell Whitmore his plan didn't work. Nobody has to die tonight. You get paid either way, I'm guessing. Why risk your neck? Because Whitmore doesn't accept failure, Cobb said. We don't deliver you dead, we end up dead ourselves. Then you're already in a bad situation. Might as well choose the option that doesn't involve killing a lawman. The standoff held for another few seconds. Then from upstairs came the sound of more footsteps, multiple people moving fast. Someone shouted, "Deputy Reeves, you down there?" It was enough to break the moment. Cobb swore and backed toward the stairs. "This isn't over," he said, but he and his men were already retreating. A moment later, townspeople poured down the stairs, Martha Henley, followed by the Chen family and several other residents, all carrying lanterns and makeshift weapons. "We saw those men heading this way," Martha said breathlessly. "We knew what they were planning." Half the town's outside right now, waiting to see what happens. Sam looked at Reeves and saw the same realization in the young man's eyes. The conspiracy had depended on secrecy, on controlling the narrative, on making sure no one asked too many questions. But secrets couldn't survive daylight, and questions were being asked now by people who'd been silent too long. "I think," Sam said quietly, "Clarence Whitmore's about to have a very bad day tomorrow." Morning came too quickly. Sam had spent what remained of the night in his cell, but he wasn't alone anymore. Townspeople took turns standing watch outside the courthouse, making sure no more attempts were made on his life. Deputy Reeves stayed in the basement, his service revolver loaded and ready. "You should get some rest," Sam told the young man around dawn. "Can't. Too much to think about." Reeves leaned against the wall, his face shadowed with exhaustion. "I keep wondering how it got this bad. How a whole town could be corrupted without anyone stopping it." "It happens gradually," Sam said. "One compromise at a time. One person looking the other way, then another. Before you know it, everyone's complicit, and the ones who aren't are too afraid to speak up. My mother would have spoken up." "Tell me about her." Reeves was quiet for a moment. "She was strong. Raised me alone after my father, after the man I thought was my father died when I was young. Or maybe he didn't die. Maybe he just left. She never talked about him much." He paused. "I wonder if she knew. If she knew who my real father was and kept it from me to protect me. Could be. Parents carry hard truth sometimes, trying to spare their children, but not knowing might be worse. All these years, I could have had answers." "You'll have answers soon enough," Sam said. "When we present that evidence in court, Whitmore's entire empire crumbles, including whatever secrets he's been keeping about his personal life." The courthouse filled early. Word had spread about the attempted jailbreak, about Deputy Reeves's testimony, about powder burns and fraudulent claims. The atmosphere was different now, not the eager bloodlust of spectators watching a stranger hang, but the tense anticipation of people waiting to see if justice might actually prevail. Judge Blackwood entered looking haggard, his earlier confidence replaced by visible strain. Sheriff Polk was notably absent, his deputy explaining that urgent business had called him away. Clarence Whitmore sat in his usual spot, but his composure showed cracks. His hand kept moving to his vest pocket, touching something there nervously. Sam noticed that gesture, a habit unconscious, the kind of thing a man did when carrying something that gave him security or power. A weapon, perhaps. A small derringer that might leave powder burns on a victim's clothing. "This court is reconvened," Judge Blackwood announced. "Before we proceed, I want to address last night's incident. It has come to my attention that there was an attempted disruption at the courthouse. Deputy Reeves, do you have anything to report?" Reeves stood. 3 men attempted to remove the prisoner from custody under false pretenses. They fled when townspeople arrived. "I believe it was an attempted murder disguised as a jailbreak. These are serious allegations." "Can you identify these men?" "I can, Your Honor, and I believe they were acting on orders from someone in this courtroom." Whitmore half rose from his seat. "Your Honor, this is outrageous." "The deputy has no proof." "I have plenty of proof, Mr. Whitmore." Reeves pulled out a folded document. "This is a bank record showing a payment of $500 from your account to Jake Cobb, the man who led last night's attack. The payment was made 2 days ago, the day after Mr. Bridger revealed his identity as an outlaw hunter. That payment was for legitimate services. Cobb does security work for my mining operations. security work that includes attempted murder. Judge Blackwood banged his gavel. Gentlemen, this is not the matter before the court. We are here to determine Mr. Bridger's guilt or innocence in the death of Edgar Finch. Your Honor, Sam said, standing, with respect, it's all the same matter. Edgar Finch was murdered because he discovered a massive fraud in the mining claims. I was framed for that murder to prevent investigation. Last night's attack proves that someone is desperate to keep the truth buried. You have no evidence of any fraud. Actually, Your Honor, I do. Sam nodded to Martha, who stood in the back of the courtroom. She came forward carrying the leather portfolio, her chin raised defiantly. This, Martha said, is the evidence Edgar Finch died protecting. Documentation of 15 years of fraudulent land transfers, bribery of public officials, and systematic theft of mining claims. My late husband began this investigation. Edgar Finch completed it. And I'm presenting it now because this town deserves to know the truth. She handed the portfolio to Sam, who opened it and began pulling out documents. Your Honor, these records show that Clarence Whitmore has been altering mining claims through bribery and forgery. Claims that should belong to dozens of legitimate miners have been transferred to his name through fraudulent means. This is preposterous, Whitmore sputtered. But his face had gone pale. Sam continued, his voice steady and authoritative. More than that, these records show payments to public officials, including payments to you, Judge Blackwood. $5,000 over 3 years in exchange for favorable rulings in claim disputes. The courtroom erupted. Judge Blackwood banged his gavel frantically, but the noise level only increased. People were standing, shouting questions, demanding answers. Order! The judge screamed. I will have order in this court! You'll have truth in this court, Sam said loudly enough to be heard over the chaos. Because that's what Edgar Finch died for. He found this evidence, documented it carefully, and was murdered to keep it secret. And I was nearly murdered for the same reason, because I started asking the wrong questions. Whitmore stood abruptly, his hand moving to his vest pocket. Sam saw it happening in the slow-motion clarity that came from decades of dangerous work. Saw Whitmore's fingers close around something small, saw him start to draw it out. He's got a gun, someone shouted. Deputy Reeves moved fast, drawing his own weapon and aiming it at Whitmore. Don't do it, sir. Put your hands where I can see them. But Whitmore's face had taken on the desperate look of a man with nothing left to lose. You've destroyed everything, he said. And it wasn't clear if he was talking to Sam or Reeves or the entire courtroom. 15 years of building, of creating something from nothing, and you want to tear it all down over some paperwork. It's not paperwork, Sam said quietly. It's people's lives, their homes, their futures. You stole from them, and when one honest man tried to stop you, you killed him. I built this town. Without my money, my mines, Redemption Creek would be nothing but a ghost town. You built it on lies and stolen land, Martha said. And my husband died trying to expose those lies. Whitmore's eyes swung to her, and Sam saw recognition there, mixed with something darker. Henry Henley. I'd almost forgotten about him. He was getting close too, asking uncomfortable questions. Had to be dealt with. The admission hung in the air like gun smoke. Martha's face went white. You killed him. His heart attack was helped along. Digitalis in his morning coffee. Easy enough to arrange. Looks natural in a man his age. Whitmore spoke with the calm of someone beyond caring. Just like Finch would have looked like a drifter's crime if this meddling fool hadn't shown up with his credentials and his questions. Deputy Reeves's hand tightened on his gun. Mr. Whitmore, I'm placing you under arrest for the murders of Edgar Finch and Henry Henley, and for conspiracy to commit murder against Samuel Bridger. You're placing me under arrest? Whitmore laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Boy, do you know who your father is? The courtroom went silent. Reeves's face showed confusion. What? Your father? The man who got your mother pregnant and then abandoned her because she wasn't good enough for a rising businessman. That was me, Deputy. I'm your father. Sam saw the impact of those words hit Reeves like a physical blow. The young man's gun hand wavered, his face cycling through shock, disbelief, and something like grief. Whitmore seized the moment, pulling the small derringer from his pocket. But Sam was already moving, years of training overriding the chains that still bound his wrists. He threw himself forward, crashing into Whitmore as the derringer fired. The bullet went wild, shattering a window. Sam and Whitmore hit the floor hard, Sam's shoulder taking the brunt of the impact despite his bound hands. He heard shouts, footsteps running, but his focus stayed on Whitmore and the gun. The derringer skittered across the floor. Reeves kicked it away, then hauled Whitmore to his feet with surprising strength for someone who'd just had his world shattered. "I don't care who you are," Reeves said, his voice shaking but determined. "You're under arrest." Judge Blackwood had disappeared during the commotion, fled through the side door to his chambers. Sheriff Polk's continued absence suddenly made sense. The whole corrupt structure was collapsing, and the guilty were running. Martha helped Sam to his feet. "Are you hurt?" "I've had worse." Sam looked at Reeves, saw the young man struggling to maintain composure as he handcuffed Whitmore. "Deputy, you did good. He's my father." Reeves said it like he was testing the words, seeing how they fit. "My whole life I wondered. And now I wish I didn't know. What matters isn't where you come from," Sam said. "It's who you choose to be. Today, you chose justice over blood. That takes real strength." The courtroom had descended into controlled chaos. Townspeople were examining the documents Martha had presented, reading the evidence of corruption that had controlled their lives for years. Some were angry, some vindicated, some simply stunned, a voice called from the back. "What about the judge?" "And the sheriff?" "Send word to the territorial marshal," Sam said. "They'll send someone to handle the rest of the arrests. But for now, this town needs temporary leadership. People who can be trusted." Eyes turned to Martha, to Deputy Reeves, and to Sam himself. The three people who'd stood up when it mattered, who'd risked everything for truth. Sam looked down at the chains still on his wrists. "I think," he said to Reeves, "you can probably take these off now." The hours following Whitmore's arrest blurred together in a confusion of statements, documentation, and decisions that had to be made quickly. Sam found himself at the center of it all, his experience providing a steady hand in the chaos. But his mind kept circling back to Deputy Reeves, to the devastation in the young man's eyes when he learned who his father was. By late afternoon, Whitmore sat in the same cell that had held Sam, looking diminished without his wealth and power to prop him up. Sheriff Polk had been found trying to board a stagecoach at the edge of town, and he now occupied the adjacent cell. Judge Blackwood remained missing, though search parties were combing the surrounding mountains. Sam stood in the courthouse office with Martha and Reeves, sorting through Edgar Finch's personal effects that had been returned from his boarding room. Most of it was mundane, clothes, a few books, toiletries. But Martha's hand stopped on a small wooden box tucked at the bottom of a bag. "This doesn't look like something Edgar would own," she said, opening it carefully. Inside was a faded tintype photograph, the kind people treasured when photographs were still rare and expensive. It showed a young woman, perhaps 25, standing beside a well-dressed man in his early 30s. The woman held a baby, maybe a year old. The image was creased and worn, as though it had been handled many times. Martha studied it, her face going still. "I know this woman. This is Clara Reeves, Tom's mother." Deputy Reeves, who'd been reviewing claim documents at the desk, looked up sharply. "My mother? Why would Edgar have a photograph of my mother?" "Look at the man," Martha said quietly, handing him the tintype. Reeves took it with shaking hands. The man in the photograph was younger, thinner, but unmistakable. "That's Whitmore. But this means—" He looked at the baby. "Is that me?" "It must be," Martha said gently. "Tom, your mother died when you were 16. How much did she tell you about your father?" "Nothing. Just that he was gone, that he'd left before I could remember him. I always assumed he was dead, or maybe just a coward who ran." Reeves stared at the photograph. "She never said it was Whitmore. Never even hinted." Sam took the tintype carefully, examining the back. There in faded ink, someone had written, "Clara, Charles, and Thomas. May 1863. Charles is Clarence Whitmore's first name," Martha said. "Not many people know that. He started using his middle name when he came to Redemption Creek. Said it sounded more distinguished. Why would Edgar have this?" Reeves asked. Sam turned the photograph over again, studying the details with the eye of someone trained to see what others missed. Look at the way it's worn. This was carried often, kept close. Edgar wasn't just documenting fraud. He was documenting personal connections. He wanted to understand the full scope of Whitmore's corruption, including his personal history. But why does it matter that Whitmore is my father? Maybe it doesn't, Sam said. Or maybe it matters more than we know. Martha, you said Clara Reeves died when Tom was 16. How did she die? Martha's face grew troubled. It was sudden. She'd been in good health, then she took ill one evening. Fever, they said. She was gone within 3 days. Tom was devastated. Who attended her? Old Doc Matthews. He's been dead 5 years now. Sam felt pieces clicking together, forming a picture he didn't want to see. Tom, when did you join the sheriff's department? 2 years ago. Why? Before that, what did you do? Worked odd jobs around town. Mining, carpentry, whatever paid. My mother left me a small inheritance. Not much, but enough to live modestly. Reeves' eyes narrowed. What are you getting at? How much did your mother leave you? Specifically, about $8,000. It surprised me at the time because we'd never had much money. She kept it in an account at the Territorial Bank, made sure I knew how to access it before she died. Sam looked at Martha. That's a significant sum for a woman living modestly. Where would Clara Reeves have gotten $8,000? Understanding dawned on Martha's face. You think Whitmore gave it to her? I think Whitmore paid her. The question is, for what? Silence about Tom's parentage, or something else. Reeves stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I need to talk to him. To Whitmore. I need to know what my mother knew, what she kept from me. Tom, Martha said gently. Maybe it's better not to. No. I've spent my whole life not knowing. Not understanding why my mother looked sad sometimes when she thought I wasn't watching. Why she never talked about my father. Why she seemed afraid of something I couldn't see. He headed for the door. I'm going to get answers. Sam and Martha followed him down to the cells. Whitmore sat on his cot, head in his hands. He looked up as they approached, his eyes focusing on Reeves with something that might have been regret. Deputy, he said. Come to gloat? I came for the truth. About my mother. About this. Reeves held up the tintype. Whitmore's face changed when he saw the photograph. Where did you get that? Edgar Finch had it. Why? Because he was thorough. Too thorough. Whitmore stood slowly, moving to the bars. That was taken 6 months before I left. Before I told Clara, I couldn't acknowledge you publicly, that it would ruin my business prospects. Before I became the man you see now. My mother died when I was 16. Was that natural? Whitmore's silence was answer enough. Reeves's hands clenched the bars. Tell me. She came to me, Whitmore said finally. Said she was going to expose me till the second day of trial began with Sam taking the stand. He'd testified many times, but always with the detachment of a professional witness. This time felt personal. Prosecutor Grant walked him through his credentials. 30 years as an outlaw hunter, over 200 captures, commendations from territorial governors and federal marshals. She established his expertise, his reputation for integrity, his lifetime of service to justice. Mr. Bridger, she said, holding up his worn leather journal. Can you explain what this is? That's my case journal. I documented every criminal I tracked, every capture I made, dates, locations, methods used, evidence gathered. It's a complete record of my career, and this brand on your forearm, the Silver Star. What does it signify? Sam rolled up his sleeve, displaying the mark. It identifies me as a certified outlaw hunter. Only about 50 men ever received this brand. It was given by territorial commissioners after 5 years of proven service. It can't be forged or faked. It's burned into the skin in a specific ceremony with witnesses. Grant turned to the jury. This man spent 30 years upholding the law. He tracked the most dangerous criminals in the territories. His reputation is impeccable, and Clarence Whitmore tried to frame him for murder simply because he was a convenient stranger. That tells you how desperate Whitmore was to hide the truth. The defense attorney tried to suggest that Sam's past didn't prove his innocence in this case, but it was weak. The jury could see the contrast. a lifetime of integrity versus Whitmore's documented corruption. Then came Marshal Dave Corrigan. He testified about Sam's reputation in law enforcement, about the respect he commanded among federal and territorial marshals. He detailed his own investigation into the corruption, how Edgar Finch's documentation proved years of systematic fraud. Marshal Corrigan, Grant asked, "In your professional opinion, was Samuel Bridger framed for Edgar Finch's murder?" "Absolutely. The evidence was planted, witnesses were coached, and the whole thing was designed to close the case quickly before anyone could look too closely at why Finch was really killed. And why was he killed? Because he documented proof of massive fraud. Mining claims worth millions of dollars had been stolen through forged documents and bribed officials. Whitmore couldn't let that evidence become public, so he eliminated the man who'd gathered it. The prosecution's case built like a wall, brick by brick. By midday, the picture was complete and damning. But the real climax came when Grant called Clarence Whitmore himself to the stand. Whitmore's attorney argued against it, but Whitmore overruled him. "I'll testify. I have nothing to hide." Judge Stiles raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Whitmore, your attorney is advising against this for good reason. Are you certain you want to proceed?" "I built this town," Whitmore said, standing. "I have a right to defend what I created." Sam watched carefully as Whitmore took the stand. There was something manic in his eyes now, the look of a man who'd lost everything and no longer cared about consequences. Grant began questioning, and Whitmore answered with increasing hostility. He admitted to buying claims from miners, but insisted all transactions were legitimate. When confronted with forged signatures, he blamed clerks. When asked about bribes to officials, he called them consulting fees. "Mr. Whitmore," Grant said, "let's talk about Edgar Finch. When did you first learn he was investigating the mining claims?" A few weeks before he died. He came to me with questions, accusations. I told him he was mistaken." "Did you threaten him?" "I told him that spreading false information could have consequences." "What kind of consequences?" "Legal consequences. Defamation, slander, not murder." "I didn't kill Edgar Finch." Grant walked to the evidence table and picked up the Derringer. "This is your weapon, isn't it? Your initials are engraved on the grip." "I own a Derringer, yes. For protection." "Where was it on the night Edgar Finch died?" "In my vest pocket, where I always keep it." "So you were carrying the murder weapon on the night of the murder. You had motive. Finch threatened to expose your fraud. You had opportunity. You knew where he worked, his habits. And the medical examiner testified that the fatal wound came from exactly this type of weapon." Grant paused. "Mr. Whitmore, did you shoot Edgar Finch?" Whitmore's face reddened. "That clerk was going to destroy everything I built. 15 years of work, of creating something from nothing. He wanted to tear it all down over some paperwork technicalities." "Paperwork technicalities? You mean forged documents and stolen property?" "I made Redemption Creek. Without my mine, my investments, this town would be nothing. Those miners couldn't make anything of those claims. I turned them into something productive by stealing them, by developing them, by having the vision and capital to make them work." Whitmore was standing now, his voice rising. "Edgar Finch was a clerk, and nobody who thought he could judge me, expose me. He had no right." "So you killed him?" "He left me no choice." The words burst out before Whitmore could stop them. The courtroom went silent. His attorney dropped his head into his hands. Judge Stiles leaned forward. "Mr. Whitmore, are you confessing to the murder of Edgar Finch?" Whitmore seemed to realize what he'd said. I meant that legally I had no choice but to defend my reputation. You just stated that Edgar Finch left you no choice." "No choice but to do what?" Whitmore's face cycled through emotions, rage, fear, resignation. Finally, he slumped in his chair. He was going to ruin me. Present his evidence, destroy everything. I went to talk to him that night, tried to reason with him. He refused to listen. He said justice mattered more than money, that the truth had to come out. Whitmore laughed bitterly, as if truth ever mattered against power. "So you shot him." I pulled out my Derringer to frighten him, to show him I was serious. But he didn't back down. He said he'd rather die than let corruption stand. Whitmore's voice dropped to almost a whisper. So I obliged him. The courtroom exploded. People shouting, crying, demanding justice. Judge Stiles banged her gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Whitmore sat in the witness box, looking oddly relieved, as if confession had lifted a weight he'd been carrying too long. When order was finally restored, Grant had one more question. "Mr. Whitmore, you also confessed to the murder of Clara Reeves and Henry Henley. Do you maintain those confessions?" "Yes, Clara threatened to expose me. Henry was investigating me. They both chose to stand in my way, and they paid the price." He looked directly at Tom Reeves in the gallery. "Your mother was weak. She wanted me to acknowledge you, to play father to a bastard son. I couldn't afford that scandal." Tom Reeves stood, his face pale but his voice steady. "My mother was stronger than you'll ever be. She raised me alone, worked hard, taught me integrity. Everything good in me came from her. Everything contemptible came from you, and I've spent every day fighting against becoming you." "Bailiff," Judge Stiles said, "remove Mr. Whitmore from the stand and return him to custody." This court stands in recess. As Whitmore was led away, Sam saw Tom Reeves standing rigid, fists clenched. Martha moved to comfort him, and Sam joined them. "It's over," Sam said quietly. "He confessed to everything. The jury doesn't even need to deliberate." "I know." Tom's voice was thick with emotion. "But hearing him say it, hearing him admit he killed my mother because she was an inconvenience, he's a monster," Martha said firmly. "But you're not him, Tom. You're her son, Clara's son, and she would be so proud of the man you've become." The trial reconvened an hour later. Judge Stiles addressed the courtroom with stern authority. "Given Mr. Whitmore's confession to 3 counts of first-degree murder, along with admissions to fraud and bribery, this court sees no need for extended deliberation. However, the law requires that a jury render the verdict." "Bailiff, escort the jury to the deliberation room." The jury was gone less than 20 minutes. They filed back in, their faces solemn. The foreman stood when Judge Stiles asked for the verdict. "On all counts of murder, fraud, bribery, and conspiracy, we find the defendant guilty." The courtroom erupted again, but this time with relief and vindication rather than outrage. People embraced, wept, celebrated. 15 years of corruption had finally ended with those 2 words: guilty. Judge Stiles allowed the reaction for a moment, then called for order. "Clarence Whitmore, you have been found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder, along with numerous counts of fraud and bribery. This court will reconvene tomorrow morning for sentencing. Until then, you will remain in custody." This court is adjourned. As people filed out, Sam found himself surrounded by grateful townspeople. Jakob Peterson clasped his hand. "Thank you for not giving up on us." Sarah Carmichael hugged him, tears streaming down her face. "My father can finally rest in peace." But Sam's attention was on Tom Reeves, who stood alone near the front of the courtroom, staring at the empty witness stand where his father had confessed to murdering his mother. Sam approached quietly. "You all right?" "I don't know what I am," Tom admitted. "I wanted justice for my mother. I wanted him to pay for what he did. Now it's happening, and I just feel empty." "Justice doesn't erase grief, Tom. It can't bring back the people we've lost. But it can give their deaths meaning. Your mother died because she threatened to expose a corrupt man. Now that man will face the full consequences of his actions. That's something? Is it enough? It never is. But it's all we have." They stood together in the emptying courtroom. 2 men who'd been strangers a week ago, but had become bound by shared purpose and pain. Tomorrow would bring sentencing. Whitmore would likely hang, along with Sheriff Polk. Judge Blackwood would spend the rest of his life in prison. The corrupt system would be dismantled and rebuilt. But tonight, there was just this. The moment after justice, when the work was done, but the healing hadn't yet begun. The space between verdict and peace, where everyone had to figure out how to move forward. 2 weeks had passed since Judge Stiles sentenced Clarence Whitmore to hang. The execution was scheduled for the following month, enough time for appeals that everyone knew would go nowhere. Sheriff Polk had received the same sentence. Judge Blackwood, showing slightly more mercy due to his lesser role, got 20 years in territorial prison. Redemption Creek was healing, but slowly. The process of restoring fraudulent claims to their rightful owners had begun under Marshal Corrigan's supervision. Federal investigators had uncovered even more corruption than they'd initially suspected, bribes extending into the territorial capital, other officials who'd been compromised over the years. It would take months, maybe years, to sort everything out properly. But the town felt different now. People walked with their heads higher. Conversations in the street were louder, more confident. The fear that had hung over Redemption Creek for 15 years had lifted, replaced by cautious optimism. Sam stood on the porch of the small cabin at the edge of town that he'd rented from Martha. It wasn't much, 2 rooms and a fireplace, but it suited him. Through the windows, he could see the main street below and the mountains rising beyond. It was peaceful in a way that his years of constant travel had never allowed. He heard footsteps approaching and turned to see Martha climbing the path to his cabin. She carried a basket covered with a checkered cloth, and her face showed a mix of purpose and something gentler. "Brought you supper," she said, setting the basket on the small table. "You've been working so hard with Marshal Corrigan, I figured you'd forget to eat." "You're probably right." Sam smiled and uncovered the basket. Roast chicken, bread, vegetables. "Martha, you don't have to keep feeding me, I know. But I want to." She sat in the chair beside his, looking out at the view. "It's strange, isn't it? After everything that's happened, everything we uncovered, the town just keeps going. People get up, go to work, live their lives. That's how healing works. Not all at once, but day by day. People adapting to the truth, learning to trust again. Tom Reeves stopped by the boarding house this morning. He's been offered a permanent position as federal deputy marshal. Dave Corrigan thinks highly of him. He should. Tom's got the makings of a fine lawman. Honest, brave, willing to do what's right even when it costs him. Like you." Sam was quiet for a moment. "I spent 30 years doing this work, Martha, hunting criminals, bringing them to justice. I told myself it was about making the world better, safer. But sitting here now, I wonder if I wasn't just running from something. From what? From settling down, from connecting to people, to places. It's easier to chase bad men across territories than to put down roots and face the ordinary challenges of life." Martha reached over and took his hand. "Maybe, but you stopped running when it mattered. You could have left Redemption Creek after proving your innocence. Instead, you stayed and helped us fight for justice. That's not running, Sam. That's standing, I suppose. I've been thinking about something." Martha's voice grew more tentative. "The town council met yesterday. They want to officially offer you the position of town marshal. Permanent, not temporary. Good salary, a house that comes with the job. They even commissioned a badge already." Sam looked at her, trying to read the emotion behind the words. "And what do you think about that?" "I think Redemption Creek needs someone like you. Someone who can't be bought or intimidated. Someone who will protect the people who can't protect themselves." She paused. "And I think I'd like you to stay. Not just for the town, but for me." It was the most direct she'd been about the growing connection between them. Sam had felt it too, the comfort of her company, the way conversation flowed easily, the shared understanding that came from surviving hard things together. "I came here looking for peace," Sam said. "An escape from violence and difficulty. But what I found instead was purpose. People worth fighting for. A town worth protecting." He squeezed her hand gently. "And someone worth staying for." Martha's smile was warm and genuine. "Then you'll take the position. On one condition. The town has to understand I'm not young anymore. I can't chase outlaws through the mountains like I did 20 years ago. They need to hire a deputy marshal to handle the day-to-day work. Someone young and capable. Already done. Tom Reeves agreed to split his time between federal cases and helping with town law enforcement. He said he'd be honored to work with you, learn from your experience. Then I accept. On one more condition, you'll have dinner with me at least once a week. Not you bringing food to my cabin, but both of us sitting down together, taking time to just talk and be in each other's company. I'd like that very much." They sat together as evening fell, comfortable in the silence between words. Sam thought about how strange life could be. A week ago he'd been in chains, facing a murder charge. Now he had a home, a purpose, and the beginning of something that might become love, given time. The next morning, the town gathered in front of the courthouse for a small ceremony. Marshal Corrigan presented Sam with his badge, a silver star with Town Marshal Redemption Creek engraved around the edge. Below that, his name, Samuel Bridger. "This town went through dark times," Corrigan said to the assembled crowd. "But you came through it together. And a big part of that was having someone willing to stand up for the truth, even when it was dangerous. Sam Bridger proved himself to be that person. I can't think of anyone better suited to protect this community going forward." Tom Reeves stepped forward with a second badge, Deputy Marshal. "Mr. Bridger, I'd be honored to serve as your deputy. You taught me what real integrity looks like. I hope to spend years learning from your example." Sam accepted both badges, feeling their weight in his hands. He thought about the silver star brand on his arm, about 30 years of pursuing justice across territories. This was different, not hunting criminals across vast distances, but standing guard over one small community. It felt right, like he'd finally found where he belonged. "Thank you for this honor," Sam said, addressing the crowd. "I can't promise I'll be perfect. Nobody is, but I can promise I'll be honest. I'll treat everyone fairly, rich or poor, powerful or humble, and I'll remember the lessons this town taught me, that ordinary people standing together can overcome even the worst corruption. That truth matters more than convenience, and that justice is worth fighting for no matter the cost." The crowd applauded, and Jacob Peterson called out, "3 cheers for Marshal Bridger." The cheers echoed through the valley, a sound of hope and renewal. Later that afternoon, Sam and Tom visited the small cemetery on the hill above town. 3 fresh graves marked the people who died fighting Whitmore's corruption. Henry Henley's grave was 5 years old, but they'd added a new marker with the full truth: murdered while seeking justice. Clara Reeves' marker had been similarly updated. Tom stood before it for a long time, his hand resting on the stone. "I wish I could tell her," he said finally, "that justice was done, that the man who killed her faced consequences, that I turned out okay despite everything." "She knows," Sam said. "I'm not much for spiritual matters, but I believe good people leave something behind. Your mother's strength, her values, her determination to do right, all of that lives on in you. That's how she knows." They stood in silence for a moment, then moved to Edgar Finch's grave. The marker read, "Edgar Finch, claims Clark, died defending truth and justice." "The town's talking about naming something after him," Tom said. "Maybe the new courthouse when it's built, or a scholarship for young people interested in public service. He'd have liked that. Edgar struck me as the kind of man who believed in building things up, not just tearing corrupt things down." As they walked back toward town, Sam felt a sense of completion he hadn't experienced in decades. The case was solved, justice had been done, and the work of rebuilding had begun. But more than that, he'd found something he hadn't known he was missing: connection, community, a place to call home. That evening, Martha joined him on his cabin porch as sunset painted the mountains gold and purple. They sat side by side, watching the town below settle into its evening rhythms. "Do you ever regret it?" Martha asked. "Coming to Redemption Creek? Walking into all this trouble instead of the peaceful retirement you wanted?" Sam thought about it carefully. "No, I regret that good people died. I regret that it took so long for the truth to come out. But I don't regret being here, being part of the solution. Sometimes the best things come from the hardest circumstances." Edgar Finch used to say something similar. He'd say that difficult times reveal what people are really made of. Some break, some run, and some stand firm. He always tried to be someone who stood firm. He succeeded. His courage set all of this in motion. Without his investigation, without the evidence he gathered and hid, Whitmore might have continued for another 15 years. And without you, Edgar's sacrifice might have been wasted. You could have just cleared your name and left. But you stayed and fought for all of us. I'm glad I did." Sam took her hand. "For the first time in longer than I can remember, I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be. Not chasing something, not running from something. Just here, doing work that matters, with people who matter." Martha leaned against his shoulder, and they sat that way as the stars emerged one by one overhead. The town below them was peaceful, safe, healing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There always would be. But tonight, there was just this moment of earned rest after a long struggle. Sam pulled out his worn leather journal, the one he'd carried for 30 years. He opened to one of the last blank pages and began to write, Redemption Creek, Montana. September 1889, case closed. Justice served. Home found. He closed the journal and set it aside. For 3 decades, that book had been his constant companion, documenting every pursuit, every capture, every criminal brought to justice. But this case was different. This wasn't just about catching a criminal. It was about saving a community, honoring the dead, and helping the living heal. And maybe, Sam thought, that was what he'd been searching for all along. Not just the pursuit of justice in the abstract, but the chance to make a real, lasting difference in people's lives. To protect not just the law, but the people the law was meant to serve. He looked at the badge on his vest, catching the last rays of sunset. Samuel Bridger, town marshal. After 30 years of wandering, he'd finally found his place. Not in the pursuit, but in the standing. Not in the chase, but in the watch. Not in the hunting, but in the protecting. Martha stirred beside him. What are you thinking about? About how sometimes being wrongly judged for who you are is the greatest gift, even when it takes a while for folks to see the truth. He smiled at her. And about how lucky I am that I rode into this town when I did. We're the lucky ones. Sam, you gave us back something we thought we'd lost forever, the belief that good people can win, that justice can prevail, that truth matters. They sat together as full darkness fell. 2 people who'd found each other through the hardest of circumstances. Below them, Redemption Creek settled into peaceful sleep. Guarded now by a man who'd spent his life seeking justice and had finally found his home. The silver star on Sam's arm and the badge on his vest both caught the lamplight from inside the cabin. 2 symbols of the same commitment, to stand for what was right, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, to ensure that good people's sacrifices weren't in vain. And in that moment, sitting on a porch in a small Montana town he'd never heard of until 2 weeks ago, Samuel Bridger felt more at peace than he had in 30 years. Not because the world was suddenly perfect, but because he'd found his place in it. Found people worth protecting, work worth doing, and maybe, just maybe, someone worth building a future with. The mountains stood silent, watch overhead. The same mountains that had witnessed 15 years of corruption and would now witness however many years of honest governance Sam could help provide. The story of Redemption Creek's darkness was ending. The story of its redemption was just beginning, and Sam Bridger, after 3 decades of wandering, had finally come home.